Today we're going to talk about the gateway theory on the use of electronic cigarettes causing a new generation of youth to become dependent on nicotine and make them at risk for smoking. The first thing we've got to figure out is what is a gateway. And the only definition that I could find is through addiction medicine. It's basically the use of one illicit substance, making it more likely for you to go on to use another one that's stronger. And that doesn't really apply to what we're talking about here because we're talking about nicotine to nicotine. But the theory is very similar, that if you use a product, it's going to make you more likely to use a more dangerous product, going from electronic cigarettes to cigarettes. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to accept that as our gateway theory. So we got to unfortunately put some numbers on this, and all those statistics are kind of boring. I'll try to make it as interesting as I can. If you want to look at these numbers, you got to start with the population at risk, and the population at risk is the middle and high school students in the United States. The last census in 2010 put that number of people at about 45 million people, or 40 million people. If we move that forward now 7 years and say, well, accept as our baseline 45 million people in the middle and high school age groups, we can have our basis for starting. Now we've got to break that down statistically. According to the CDC, about 20% in 2016, about 20% of the middle and high school students were using some sort of a tobacco product, and they lump everything into that, including electronic cigarettes. So if we say we're looking at 20% of that 45 million and represent that by this sheet of paper, we've got about 9 million people in middle and high school who are using all forms of tobacco product. We've got to break this down further because these aren't the people who are vaping. This is all tobacco products. So if we want to look at people who we consider to be at risk, we've got to start cutting this down. Again, according to the CDC, about 65% of all those tobacco products users were using electronic cigarettes. So now we've trimmed that piece of paper down to 65%, which amounts to about 5,850,000 people in that age group using electronic cigarettes. But this isn't really even our at-risk group, because you're only wanting to look at people who were never smokers before. Most of these people were never smokers. So the question you have to ask is, what percentage of this 5,850,000 were previously never smokers? Because then we've got to start thinking this is closer to our group that's at risk. Well, according to the CDC, 10% of this age group, it's kind of a high number, and that varies by age distribution. The older the people, the smaller the group of folks who were never smokers who tried electronic cigarettes. But in this age group, the CDC says that 10% were never smokers when they tried vapor products for the first time. So we're narrowing it down now. We're down to the 10%. This is 10% of that last sheet, and this amounts to about 585,000 people. Now, this really isn't even our at-risk group either, because if we're looking at the definition of a gateway and talking about it being a pathway to a new generation of nicotine addicts being prone to cigarette use, we've got to say, what is this group made up of? Well, they were never smokers. But that doesn't mean they didn't use other tobacco products. There have been studies that have shown that 2/3 of these people were using other tobacco products before they used electronic cigarettes. So if we say that only 1/3 of these were never smokers and never used other tobacco products, we've trimmed our basis for starting down to this, which is 193,000 people. But this isn't even our group. Because many of these folks don't use nicotine. So if we're talking about a pathway to nicotine addiction and making you prone to smoking cigarettes, we got to say what group of people in this small subgroup is actually using nicotine. And the studies have shown that most of the kids aren't using nicotine. So again, we'll say 2/3 of the people aren't using nicotine. That's a pretty reasonable number, and 1/3 are. So what we've done now is we've trimmed our population base down to about 63,000 out of the initial 5.8 million. So there's 63,706, if you want to be very specific, people who are in this group who are using nicotine, who never smoked, never vaped, never used other tobacco products prior to this. Now we got to go back to the CDC for additional statistics, and this is a subgroup that's at risk, but most of these people don't go on to try a cigarette. There are studies that show that in this group of people, about 30% go on to try a cigarette. That's not to say they become regular smokers, it's just to say that they try a cigarette, even one. Even if they try one cigarette, they're put in that risk category of passing through the gateway. So if we say 30%, which is what the numbers are, and we say 30% of this group try a cigarette, what we're down to is we're down to this. Okay, and I'm not going to take this down any further. You can look at this group and say what percentage actually go on to become regular cigarette users. I don't know that there's a really hard information out there about that. There may be, but my scissors don't cut any smaller, and I can't write my little notes on the back on a smaller sheet of paper. So we're going to stop with this. We'll say this is the group. They try a cigarette. They're the ones who go through that gateway. That's about 19,111 people who have gone through that gateway. So the question is, what does this really mean? How do you put this into perspective with the gateway theory? Interestingly, if you look at the smoking rate in that age group, middle and high school students, since 2013, the rate of decline in smoking has dramatically increased. It's never been at a higher rate of smoking cessation in the history of measuring the statistics since 2013. 2013 is the year that electronic cigarettes really started to boost up in popularity. They've been going up since then. Smoking has been going down since then in that age group. So the question is, if you have a gateway, and we've shown statistically that we can show a gateway, why would smoking cessation be at the highest levels it's ever been at? Well, the answer is really simple. If you talk about addiction medicine and you talk about their gateway is unidirectional. You go from marijuana to cocaine, cocaine to heroin, and you don't usually use heroin to go back to cocaine or cocaine to go back to marijuana. You're going in one direction to a stronger drug, stronger illicit drug. But with tobacco and electronic cigarettes, we're talking about a gate that moves in both directions. You open that gate and you have a small number of people who will be trying to get into that gate where they're smokers, but you've got a tremendous number of other people behind that gate who are smokers who are trying to get out. So if you think of it in terms of osmosis, the equilibrium is going to be moving from the high density to the low density. So you're going to have a lot more people moving from smokers to non-smokers if you have an effective gateway than you are going to have non-smokers moving to be smokers. And that's exactly the effect that we're seeing. There have been a couple of interesting studies out recently that I just want to mention that really point to the effectiveness of it. If you look at just the pre-existing nicotine replacement therapies, the study showed them to be about maybe 20% effective at best. Long-term, over a year, they're far less effective, maybe about 10 to 12% effective. But we've got some studies both out of Europe and the United States. One study out of Europe, looking at the Eurobarometer survey by Constantino Farsalinos, has shown that use of electronic cigarettes is a very effective tool for smoking cessation. It has a high level of confidence, 95% level of confidence, that daily use of electronic cigarettes is a very effective tool for smoking cessation. We have another study. This is 2017. Another one on addictive behavior, which is out of the United States, looking at the tobacco surveys in America, shows much the same things. This one, the one by Farsalinos, shows about a 47 to 49% rate of effectiveness, whether you either use nicotine or don't use nicotine in your e-liquid. We'll round that up to be about 50% effective in smoking cessation when used on a regular basis. Similarly, this article on addictive behavior finds almost exactly the same percentage. If you use them on a daily basis, electronic cigarettes on a daily basis, you have about a 50% success rate in getting off of combustible tobacco products. That's far and away higher than what we see with other forms of nicotine replacement therapy. So when we're talking about this gateway effect, you have to balance that, and not you can't discount the individuals. That 19,000 people in the United States who are middle to high school students who are going to move from electronic cigarettes to smoking. You can't discount that. You still have to take those people into account and try to prevent that as best you can. If you're in public health service, that's your job. But you also can't discount the fact that you've got this gateway that's really an exit gateway, and far more people are using that gateway to get away from smoking than they are to get into smoking. That's why you see the continued decline in the smoking rate in this age group, is because of the adoption, a rapid adoption of the electronic cigarettes as a smoking cessation tool. And let's not be mistaken, that's what these people are using it for. They're not using it to be popular, as a thrill, to look good. These people are using it because they were smokers or were using other forms of tobacco products, and they're trying to find a safer way to get off of those. And electronic cigarettes are the way they've chosen. We're not going to change that. There are already rules in place in every state for either 18 or 21 years as the limit to buy any kind of tobacco product, including electronic cigarettes, cigars, whatever. But they still find a way to do that. That's something we're not going to change, but we have to change our concept of this as a gateway to smoking, more as an exit gateway from smoking. It's food for thought. If you present this kind of information to researchers, they'll just look at you and go, well, we can't prove that. You have to look at the literature and do more than this kind of analysis to prove that. But logically speaking, when you look at the data and you look at the statistics, it's a no-brainer. Hopefully, one of these days, somebody will come out with a literature review that confirms what I'm saying. But for now, it's just what I believe. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comment section below. I'll be happy to answer them as soon as I can. Thank you for your time and attention.